Good afternoon, everybody. This is Herbert Puchter speaking. I'm here in the Cambridge office in Sao Paulo. I'm very, very happy to be here with you today. I'm delighted that you are joining us in this event. The topic, as you know, because you've already received the information and the invitation, but we're going to be looking at something that I think is important. We, as language teachers, we don't just teach language, okay? We don't just teach a system of lexes and structures and pronunciation and intonation and what have you. If we want to be successful, especially in the teenage classroom, we actually need to reach beyond language. And I think since language is so closely related and so intimately tied in with who we are, with our identity, teaching a language to teenagers offers a wonderful opportunity to help them develop into responsible citizens of this world. So it's about fostering responsibility, and it's about fostering responsibility in the teenage classroom. So I believe that as teachers of teenagers, we have a dual responsibility. We are educators and we are language teachers at the same time. So let me just welcome you first of all and ask you, and I'm here in the office in Sao Paulo. I have with me next to me Tiago, who helps me with the technical equipment. Tiago, can I ask you to get me the box with the comments? And opposite me is sitting Katja, who many of you know. And they're helping me with this event. Okay, I would now like to invite you to become active, and I would like you to use your dialog box and just type in a few words in answer to this question here. What do you personally find rewarding about teaching teenagers? I'll give you a minute or two to type in your answers, please. Okay, what I can see is the possibility to be an example, a model, a role model for the teenagers. Their pace, how quick they are. Yes, Patricia, I completely agree with you. Anything else you find rewarding about teaching teenagers? I can see it here now. I can see the chat here. I love learning with them. That's a wonderful idea. The teacher who is not just a teacher, but a learner at the same time. It's a huge challenge, and we love challenges. That's a good point. Being able to see their development and influencing them in their development. Yes. The challenge to engage them, absolutely. I so agree. Lovely. Anything else that you can think of? Okay. Well, thanks so much for this positive start to the session. It's always great to talk to teachers who are passionate about their profession, and if we are able to be passionate about teaching teenagers, that is a wonderful mission, actually. I think it was Michael Grinder who once said, if you can teach teenagers, you can teach anyone, because it is true that it's maybe easier to teach young learners. It's maybe easier to teach adults, but teachers, sorry, a Freudian slip here. Teenagers can actually be quite a challenge for us. So I think you will probably agree that at least sometimes teaching teenagers is not just pleasure. So sometimes we do feel like the colleague here in this image. It can be a draining activity sometimes. Graziella has just said being around teens gives me loads of energy, and I agree with you. But sometimes it can also be a draining activity. So what I would like you to do now is think of the last time you were actually teaching teenagers. And for some of you, this is probably this morning. For some of you, if you are, say, an educational manager and coordinator, it might not have been today. But when you think of the kind of challenges, so the kind of problems we come across in the teenage classroom, I'm sorry, I can just see my typo here. Categories, I meant, of course, not categories. What categories of challenges have you come across, or did you come across in your last lesson? So I would ask you not to write down a specific problem, but rather the problem category. Boredom is something that Patricia has written down here. Thank you. Is there anything else? Classroom management, excellent, thank you. Engaging them in the learning process. So this might be a question of motivation, I guess. Discipline, absolutely, thank you so much. Anything else?
Here. Cognitive behavioral.
Okay, cognitive behavioral challenges of different levels. Time challenges, yes, because they are so busy with other things. Discipline, I can see. Talkative classes, and I guess what you mean here is that they have to talk a lot, but often in Portuguese and unfortunately not in English. Their behavior again, thank you very much. Keep them interested, yes. Have respect with one another. Defiance, absolutely. Their cell phones, getting them to not constantly focus on their mobiles or their cell phones. Yes, and we could go on. The interesting thing is that if we look at this list that you have come up with here, commitment would be another one. And I've asked this question. I've asked colleagues in many countries around the world this question. It's quite fascinating. If you think of all the challenges we've listed here, motivation and behavior and discipline, commitment and keeping them interested, getting them to respect one another, getting them not to be distracted by their mobile phones, and what have you. How many of these challenges have actually got to do with language? Well, it's fascinating because very often these challenges are beyond language. Of course, there might be language challenges too, but the challenges, the problems that teachers share most often when I ask them about these challenges in the teenage classrooms, they go beyond language. So I believe that in order to look at these challenges, we need to go beyond language too. And one good way to start would be the students' brains. This is a very simplified, obviously, piece of illustration that shows two very, very important structures in the brain that actually have a lot of influence on the development of the teenage students, especially in the most difficult, most challenging phases in their development when they are adolescents. We are talking the cerebral cortex, which is the skin over the brain. It's sometimes also called, it's called the gray matter. It's as I've said, the skin over the brain, it's 4 to 6 millimeters thick. And from an evolutionary point of view, it's the youngest part of the human brain. It's called the cortex, or often called the neocortex, to stress the fact that it's the youngest part of the human brain. This part of the brain, this structure of the brain, is actually responsible for all kinds of higher order thinking skills. So the ability to solve problems, the ability to analyze situations, logical thinking is something that has to do with the frontal lobe, the frontal part of the cerebral cortex. Memory, of course, is something that is also linked to the cortex. And whenever you engage your students in some kind of cognitive development, when you want to develop their critical thinking, when you engage them in challenging cognitive tasks, this is the part of the brain, the structure of the brain that you want to be activated. And of course, when we think of the development of young people, when we think of adolescents, we actually want them to become mature as soon as possible. We want them to develop their cerebral cortex. But unfortunately, when they are teenagers, and especially when they go through the adolescent years, the structure in the brain that actually somehow stands in the way of developing this cortex, and stands in the way of becoming mature and responsible citizens of this world, is the so-called limbic system, the part of the structure in the brain that has to do with emotions. Now, let us have a look at what this means. Well, this actually means that the limbic system, when they become adolescents, when they go into their adolescent years, the limbic system changes dramatically. They become prone to risk-taking. They want immediate gratification. They want fun. And they develop a very strong interest in anything that's different from their parents, and anything that's different from their school experiences so far. They become very interested in interaction with peers. And this is an exciting time for a young learner, but unfortunately, especially when it's mixed with modern temptations, it's also a time when students go through a phase which can be potentially rather dangerous. When we look at headlines in on and offline publications, we know immediately what I mean here. What's going on? Why is that the case? Well, the mismatch in the development between the limbic system and the development of the cortex, especially the prefrontal cortex, the maturity structure in the brain, results in obviously a lack of maturity, but also it results in a lack of ability to engage in what is called what-if thinking. In other words, they will not think ahead. If something interesting and tempting that promises pleasure comes up, many young people, not all of them, and probably not your sons and daughters, but quite a few teenage people think ahead. They want this fun, they want this pleasure, and they don't think of consequences. So it can lack to an ability to run what-if simulation. So if I engage in this, what might be the outcomes? adults have their temptations too. But adults who are mature, who have a developed prefrontal cortex, will be more easily able to say, well, what if I give in to this temptation? What might be the possible outcomes? Teenagers often don't want to do that. And interestingly, this is also the reason why they may find it difficult to learn from mistakes, because they may find it difficult to run past what-if simulations in their mind. So many of them find it difficult to imagine what would have happened if they had acted differently, if they had done X instead of Y, for example. Okay, so here we go. Let's look a little bit further. You can see the research I'm using here is actually all pretty current. This is a Jay Geert publication. He's a cognitive psychologist. This is from 2015. He says that adolescence is a time of great danger, but, and this is where we come in as teachers, it's also it's a phase of a time of wonderful opportunity to influence young people respectfully. And he says that society should realize that the teen years are a turning point for a life of peaceful citizenship, aggression, or in rare cases, radicalization. Across all cultures, adolescents are the most vulnerable to being recruited as soldiers, as terrorists, as well as the most likely to be influenced to become teachers and engineers. And we know that. We know that, I don't know, drug gangs recruit their new collaborators when kids are 13 or 14, when they believe the kind of promises of a wonderful world of money and fast cars and what have you, and when their prefrontal cortex is not developed enough yet to think ahead and say, well, what if I really engage in this? What might be the negative, the potentially dangerous outcomes? This, for us as teachers, does not help, as we know. Okay, the teacher who tells the students what they must do and have to do and should do and ought to or ought not to do is not the one who usually gets their thinking going, is not the one who usually will be successful in helping adolescents to develop into mature adult thinkers. This doesn't work either. And yes, this is me. And no, this is not how I paint Sao Paulo red on a Saturday night. My son had great fun photoshopping this for me. But you know what I mean by this picture. This expresses, metaphorically expresses, some teachers longing to be like teenagers themselves. And we know it doesn't work. They don't want another teenager in front of themselves at the front of the class. They actually want what some of you called, when I asked, what's most rewarding, one of you said to be a role model. And I so agree with you. They need mature adult role models. This world is not an easy world for many teenagers. It's a world that offers a lot of insecurity, a lot of chaos, and a lot of confusion. And as teachers, we are actually very, very important role models. We give our students guidance in this chaos. This is a fascinating thought. It's actually some research outcome that is amazing. Research shows that when you look at the time students take to become mature adults, it seems that many kids these days become mature later on in life, and I must say I attended some classes this morning here in Sao Paulo. I worked with some kids. I actually had a wonderful conversation with kids at one school, and they seemed extremely mature. So my congratulations if you've all managed to actually educate your adolescents in such a way that their maturity is already very, very tangible and visible. Often, psychologists talk about adolescence being an artificially extended childhood. Many young people actually become mature much, much later. The development of the prefrontal cortex sometimes does not is not completed before they are in their mid, sometimes even early 30s. That's fascinating. When I work with university colleagues these days, I often hear from them that even young people at university uh, seem to show rather teenage attitudes and behavior still. This is from Todd Kestin, a series of publications in the Huff Post, something I would really like to recommend. And he says that in this world of working parents and video games, in some families, teens can go through childhood and adolescence without a real sense of responsibility. They're occupied, but not prepared for a successful life. Having responsibility for things that matter and that contribute to the welfare of others is part of a teen's preparation for future. So wherever teens can be engaged in community projects, wherever a school engages them in project work, where something serious happens in the collaboration between the teenagers in the classroom and sometimes even outside of school. These schools are making a wonderful contribution to helping them to become mature and responsible adults. Having a sense of responsibility, that's important, and not just being entertained all the time. I have nothing against teenagers having fun, but learning is something that cannot be fun only. Learning requires commitment and passion and engagement, and is actually a process where students need to make investments. I like the term paying attention, by the way, because paying attention to something I might get from my teacher, for example, that is a metaphor of making an investment. I need to pay something in order to get something. I will get, development, I will get maturity if I pay attention, if I have a passion for the things that happen in the classroom. This tendency of childhood forever has to do with the kind of world we have created for our young people. This is a study that was done in the US, where they say that teens spend an average of their free time, an average of 50% of their free time with peers and the media. So rather than having mature adult role models, their role models are their own peers, or their media and social websites, rather than healthy mentors. Actually, here they are. We know what they're like, and it's of course also a wonderful world. I don't want to downplay the importance this kind of communication for kids might have, but entertainment only, that's a problem. Okay, so I'm also not arguing here that we should go back to Stone Age. Okay, Uh, that's certainly not the case. I'm somebody who uses social media myself. Our kids, we cannot change that, but we can make decisions on the quality time we want to spend with them in the classroom. This is a quotation. It's a bit of a mouthful, as you will see. The quotation is a bit long, but it is food for thought, I believe. It comes from Daniel Levitin's book, The Organized Mind, Thinking Straight in the Age of Information Overload. And this is the quotation. He says, each time we check a Twitter feed or Facebook update or whatever else, whatever other social media we might be active on or in, we encounter something novel and feel more connected socially in a kind of weird impersonal cyber way. And our brain gets a dollop of reward hormones telling us we accomplished something. I've just written another tweet. So great, I've done something good. But remember, and I'm asking you now to think of the structure of the human brain that I showed you previously, the cortex, and in particular the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that needs to be developed so students become mature, and deeper down the limbic system, the oldest structure in the human brain. And he says, but remember, it is the dumb, novelty-seeking portion of the brain driving the limbic system that introduces this feeling of pleasure, and not the planning, scheduling, higher level thought centers in the prefrontal cortex. Make no mistake. Email, Facebook, and Twitter checking constitute a neural addiction. And it is actually an addictive chemical process that leads to this kind of being addicted to social media. Well, you're not going to change the world. I'm not going to change it either. There's no way we can do that. But as I've said, we can make decisions on the kind of quality time we want to spend with our students in our classrooms. And one of the things our students really need, in order to develop, in order to become responsible citizens of the future, is to be challenged. Jay Geared, voluminous information is available, but the quality varies greatly. The skill of the future will be to critically evaluate a vast expanse of data, to synthesize content and to apply that synthesis to real-world problem solving. Educators should challenge the adolescent brain with these tasks. I'm making this point because it is extremely important. Education is not just entertainment. Of course, a teacher who has a great sense of humor will always be the teacher who manages to reach out to her students or his students in a better way. A teacher who can laugh with her students or even about herself occasionally will be always remembered. It's important to have fun with our learners also. But fun only is not what gets them to be challenged cognitively. We need to challenge them. The teenage brain has an enormous amount of plasticity. We need to go beyond superficiality with our students. Jay Geared says things that are cognitively stimulating are important. Watching talking cats on YouTube isn't as good for cognitive development as reading or taking classes. And I'm happy to know as a teacher that entertainment will not replace us as teachers. We have an enormously important role in helping students to become mature, and the parents of your students will hopefully appreciate this. I've already said this, but I'd like to stress it again. The plasticity of the teenage brain suggests that constructive dialogues with teens about important issues such as freedoms, such as responsibilities, such as the environment, such as many, many other things can influence our students' development. I mean, this is the country of your famous son, Paulo Freire. And I don't need to mention even the importance he attributed to taking students seriously, to engaging them in dialogue, not just in functional dialogue to practice language functions, but in dialogues and conversations that enable students to share thinking and to be serious and to engage in an exchange of opinions and give them the opportunity to learn from one another and from us. So here are three key messages for educators. The first one, I believe we need to challenge our students in developing their thinking skills. Basic thinking skills should already be developed at earlier levels, but if they haven't been developed yet, we I think need to focus on them in the early years when they are pre-adolescents. So that's the first thing. But then, of course, critical thinking skills. I think we want to engage them in the exploration of values. This is not about telling them what they have to and should and ought not do, but giving them enough food for thought, helping them to think about what's right and wrong in life, because this is what the definition of values is, giving them enough reading and listening material that becomes the basic platform for their values exploration. I think this is extremely important. And last but not least, it's a fact that although adolescents and young teenagers are so cool these days, especially when they are among their peers, deep down, I strongly believe, after reading Kieran Egan's works, Kieran Egan, the Irish educational philosopher who is now professor of educational philosophy at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, who says that although teenagers are so cool and they seem to be so fun-loving and nothing is a problem for them, they live in a world that makes them very, very insecure. But they will do everything to hide their insecurities. And often they don't even share their insecurities. So a lack of self-esteem, a certain shyness, often comes with being a young teenager. And this lack of self-esteem and this lack of self-worth often leads to an attitude of defensiveness. And this attitude of defensiveness can be a reason for what we sometimes experience as very, very difficult patterns of behavior. Students who are provocative, who try to undermine the teacher's authority, who lie, who cheat, who copy their homework, who fail to own up to things they've done wrong, to take responsibility for their actions. And then the further you go down in this list, the more dramatic actually things can become. we know there are teenagers who you know, take drugs or abuse alcohol. And these are, of course, behavioral patterns that once teenagers engage in them, they can become very problematic, and sometimes it's even too late. So the third point in my list, the third key message, would be about developing self-esteem. Of course, this is easier said than done, isn't it? Self-esteem is something that if we don't have enough of it, it's a problem because our self-worth suffers. We become difficult as human beings. We become semi-aggressive. We become defensive in our behavior. But if we have too much self-esteem, we have a problem too. So neither, you know, too little nor too much actually is what we want our students to have. The question is, what can we do to develop self-esteem? There's quite a lot of research these days into what can be done. In some countries, for example, in the United States, especially in California, for some years, students were asked to engage in these self-esteem programs where they were, for example, asked to use positive affirmations to basically convince themselves that they are awesome and wonderful human beings and unique and wonderful, and they are special and they deserve the best in life. It you know, at quite a few schools, these programs were actually carried out, and educators had great hopes that these programs would actually help children to really boost their self-esteem. Well, there's been quite a bit of research into these self-esteem programs, and this research actually shows that these programs did not or do not bring the hoped for results, so to speak. You know, here's a few quotations. I think this comes from Jay Geert. He says the quest for greater self-esteem can leave people feeling empty and dissatisfied. So when a 14-year-old has great self-doubt, often about their looks, you know, telling themselves that they're beautiful, doesn't actually change these attitudes. So it's fascinating that there seems to be clear evidence that thinking about ourselves less can help boost our self-esteem quite dramatically. I'll give you an example. Self-esteem is about helping students to think of themselves or about themselves less and think more about their roles in their communities. So becoming a valuable member of the classroom, being a good friend, being a good family member, being a responsible member of our society, being a responsible citizen of the world. That is what they need to gradually understand is very, very important. And it'll give them the feedback that leads to better self-esteem. If I'm a good friend, and if I help somebody who is in trouble, who needs help, then this person will tell me how great I am. This person will be grateful for the help I've given them. So my self-esteem grows because I have done something for somebody else that they are grateful for. And this is a very, very important, I think, third point. So let me summarize before we look at a few examples, a few concrete examples. Let me summarize 3 key points: developing their cognitive capabilities, helping them to think about what's right and wrong in life, think about values, and thirdly, engaging them in activities that help them to understand their role in a wider kind of range of community or communities. I'd like to just share a few examples now with you, if I may. These are examples that come from my teenage course. Some of you will recognize it. Think, or the American version of the course is called American Think. This is a unit that I'd like to not a unit, just a few examples from a unit that I will share with you here. This is from level 1. It's a text about one of the most fascinating and also dangerous places, extreme places that this world has to offer, the Kalahari Desert in sub-Saharan Africa. One of my own passions is wildlife photography. And no, I still haven't had the opportunity to take photos in the Amazon rainforest. I will need to do that soon. So one of the things I did before I was actually writing this unit with my colleagues, I was in the Kalahari Desert, and I was taking photos. I was in one of these tourist lodges and taking photos. Also, it was brilliant because I could get a first-hand experience of what the place is really like. A very safe and secure first-hand experience, of course. Colleagues often ask me, what kind of content is it that will fascinate teenagers most? What will they see as relevant and interesting and inspiring? Well, there's a number of things. Again, coming back to Kieran Egan, if you agree that teenagers are often a bit insecure, then you will also understand why trying to personalize our teaching can sometimes be so embarrassing for teenagers. We know how important it is to personalize. We know that in order to learn a language successfully, we need to use the target language in a personal way. But we also know when we ask teenagers personal questions, we can actually create real silence in our classrooms. So I'm not saying we should never personalize, but what I'm saying is that it's a good idea at the beginning of, say, a unit also, a new theme, a new thematic unit, to start from somewhere that is far away from the student's own reality. Start with something that is extreme. Start with somebody, if it's a text, who has very, very special human qualities. Teenagers love heroes. Teenagers love heroines. That's why they often select the celebrities from the world of rock and pop and the glitz and glamour of the film industry and the world of sports as their heroes and heroines. They love the kind of qualities they think these people have. Qualities, big human qualities such as love and genius and creativity and courage and tolerance and what have you. So let me just show you two examples here from this unit. The first one would be a text about the wonders and the dangers of the Kalahari. This is a place that is extremely dangerous, extremely extreme because of the extremely extreme, a bit of the tautology there, because of the very, very dangerous animals, because of the fact that there is no rain for months and months and months, and the temperatures are absolutely extreme because of the fact that people who live in the Kalahari, and there are still some San people, some San tribes, have no doctors, they have no hospitals, but they have a wonderful depth of medicinal knowledge. They know which plants to look for when they have certain illnesses, and they know how to survive in this wonderful and also frightening at the same time place. So we lead into this text by asking students to look at the photographs, name the animals in English, name other animals in English, so we activate their prior knowledge. We ask them questions about the photos. What do the photos show? Where do these people live? What do you think they eat? What dangers are there in this place? And so on and so forth. And then they read the text, and we engage them in thinking about, well, first of all, they do a comprehension task, but then we engage them in thinking about values, the values of the natural world. On the next page here, we go into language. We go into a lexical set of geographical features. We work on grammar, and then there is some listening here. I'm not going to play the listening to you, but I can tell you it's based on an authentic interview I held with one of the San people from one of the San tribes. He worked as a tracker in the lodge that I stayed, and he was a fascinating guy, and I spoke to him about what it was like to grow up in the Kalahari Desert, and he started to laugh and said, well, it was quite interesting. And I said, what do you mean? Why are you laughing? And he said, well, what is really interesting is when you're a young man and you want to find a wife in the Kalahari. And I said, tell me about it. And he said, well, if you find a girl and you want to get married to her, you have to go to the girl's father, and you have to ask him for permission to marry his daughter. But of course, her father will only give you permission once you've passed a test of courage, because you need to be a courageous person. You need to protect your future family. And I said, well, tell me about the kind of tests you had to do. And so he said, I had to do 3 tests. The first one was I had to survive in the wilderness for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. So he said, you have to go out into the wilderness, and you have to live in the wilderness and survive there. And we are talking, a place where the temperature is 45 or 50 degrees and you have no water. So he showed me actually the kind of plants you have to dig out if you're looking for water. The second thing is you have to trap animals. So you have to trap, for example, antelopes. And the third thing he had to do was you have to take away the kill from a lion. So a lion has killed, say, an antelope, a springbok or some other antelope, and you have to actually show that you are a courageous person by going up to the lion and take the kill away from them. Well, if you want to know how you do that and how they do that, you have to listen to this piece of listening in Think. I'm not going to tell you, but I can promise it's a piece of content that is fascinating for teenage students.
You know so much about the wildlife.
Well, here we are at the end of this session. We have about 7 or 8 minutes. Tiago, please help me to get the question box up again.
It's here.
It is here. Thank you so much. Okay, so dear colleagues, this is now your time. I'd love to hear if you have any comments, if there are any questions, if there's anything you'd like to share with us. Take a minute and use the chat box to write down whatever it is you would like to communicate to me and to the colleagues in the various places all over Brazil. You would appreciate some advice on how to deal better with teens. Can you be a little bit more precise?
I have another question here.
Do you have any tips on how to engage students when presenting a grammar structure? Well, that is a very, very good question, because of course it can be a real challenge. Well, I think we need to give them security. One good way of doing that is to get them, when you have presented a new text, to get them to look at this text and to actually search for certain structures in the text, then to list up these structures on the board, to get them, that's what we do in Think, for example, to complete gapped sentences from the text, and then try to look at these sentences and try to get students together with you to actually come up with a theory, with a rule. And students will not always get this right, but it's an interesting process. Or get them to look at the rules. We, for example, in Think, we have in the book, and often we get them to do a bit of a thinking task based on the rule. Is affective learning relevant to teenagers? Yes, absolutely. I think affective learning, learning not only with your mind, but also with your heart, metaphorically speaking, is something that is extremely important. When you look at the latest findings from neurobiology, you will appreciate there is no cognitive development without emotional development at the same time. Silas Ferreira, thank you very much for the feedback. You loved the metaphor of paying attention. Thank you. This is Graziella. Thanks for enriching talk. Thank you, Graziella. You have one here. I didn't see that on my screen. How to strike the right balance between being friendly and strict. Very good point. Very good point. I think we need to be a little bit stricter initially, maybe even a little bit stricter than we would like to be. But strategically, it's always better, I think, to be able to become more and more relaxed once we have established the ground rules, so to speak. Another question there on the other screen. When we challenge teenagers in a task, how can we reward them? The only way my students get involved if I say they have prizes at the end. Okay, fair enough. Prizes, rewards can be a useful tool, but actually, I think what we want to do is we want to make sure they get engaged in such a way that they activate their own reward system. Doing something that is useful rewards us internally. The brain has its own reward system. So much more important than any gold star or smiley or praise, appraisal, and prize we can get from our teacher is the feeling that we have done something wrong, that we have done something great. I'm sorry, I was getting distracted with a sentence from Silas Ferreira. It's crazy to balance discipline and interest with teenagers. I think I would agree. I hope I did not come across as having said I would like to balance that. I think we do need certain rules to be kept to in the classroom, but that is something that's not related actually to our content. Only if we have no discipline, of course, then it will be difficult to get them to pay attention. It will be difficult to motivate them in the content and in content relevance. Is homework really effective for teens? Good question, very good question, Sandra, thank you. I think it is. Homework can be very, very important, but not as a mechanical routine. I'm not saying I would never give homework that involves a mechanical routine, because even drills can be important, as we know sometimes, when it comes to practicing certain structures. But I mean also homework where we ask students to collect something, to do a little bit of research as preparation for the next topic. Occasionally ask them to write a text. Writing should not only be done at home. Writing as process is important also in the classroom, but occasionally getting them to write a text. But then we need to do something with this homework. They need to have the feeling that homework is meaningful. So if we then read their texts and do not just correct the mistakes, but comment on the content and share with them how we feel about what they have written, what we liked about what they've written, then teenagers will be more prepared to take homework seriously. We have another question there on the other screen. How can I apply these strategies having classes once in a week in a second language institute? Yes, this is not easy. If you have them only once a week, of course, we have to, I think, also make certain compromises. Let's say it like this. We can aim at that. We can aim at what I have laid out here, but we'll have to make certain compromises. Sandra Sampaio, you are in Germany. Oh, that's amazing that we have somebody who is not in Brazil taking part from abroad. Thanks very much, and greetings back to you. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you all so much. As I said, I hope to see you again one day. That's a lovely comment, Graziella. Thank you. You're thinking of adopting my new course book, Think. Thank you so much. As I said, thank you all. Thank you everybody for joining us. Hope to see you again one day, whether in cyberspace or in the real world. I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much. Thank you.